Alrighty, everybody, it is currently Saturday, December 6th, 2025, and I'm coming at you live from the universe, which is apparently in somebody's basement. Because today we're talking about Jorge Borges, I think that's how you say his name, in his short story, which is called The Aleph. Um, for this episode, we're going to shortly go over the life story of our boy Jorge, and then I'm going to actually read the story. I decided to do that instead of taking notes because I found when I take notes, it always just it's it's not an accurate representation of the story, especially the small details that come up later in stories, which I'm very dumb, so that's not something that I consider. I don't consider the fact that people put small details into a story for a reason, but, but so we're gonna actually be reading it. Don't worry, we're not doing a popcorn reading today, so no one's gonna get called on. It's just gonna be me reading the story. I was kind of like thinking about for a second. I was like, is this like copyright violation? But then I realized I was like, someone would have to listen to this for it to matter at all because it's not like I'm going to be reading it word for word. I'm probably going to be interrupting it a lot and I'm probably going to be stumbling over my words a lot. So it's not going to be the story word for word exactly. I'll try to tell you when it's me talking versus the story talking, but our boy Jorge, we're going to go over him very briefly because the story, it's a short story. It's only 11 pages, but with how dumb I am and just how slow I am generally, it's probably going to take us like 40 minutes to read an 11-page story. So we're going to go over Jorge's um life story briefly, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the information that I know on him, like that's not written down, but he writes in a very unique way that can within this context kind of make it hard to tell who's talking. Maybe not this story specifically. I haven't read the story yet because I want to give my thoughts out there nice and fresh. I know the general overview of the story. Um but yeah, so that's how it's going to go today. And then maybe if there's some time left, I'll stop the recording and then I'll go look at like an analysis of the story, some summary and stuff like that, and see how wrong I was. See how completely off the mark I am in my own personal analysis. But this guy Jorge, I don't think he cared that much, dude. You know what I mean? I think he was just into writing stories and stuff like that. Although he was very political, and we'll talk a little bit about some of that, but let's get into the boy's life story. This is The Aleph by Jorge Borges, and to understand the story, we got to understand the man. So, Jorge Isidoro Luis Borges was born to his mother, who was a translator, and his father, who was a lawyer, on August 24th, 1899, in Palermo, Buenos Aires, Argentina. This guy's from Argentina. 1899 though. So he beat the allegations. He beat the Nazi allegations. And this neighborhood, Palermo, I guess, was a pretty poor neighborhood at the time. But obviously, Jorge's mom's a translator and his dad's a lawyer. So it, it it's kind of interesting how he grew up. We'll talk about it. He lives in this poor neighborhood, but relative to everyone else around him, he has a lot of money, or his family has a lot of money. And so, yeah, it's just a weird, unique situation. And he doesn't spend a ton of time in Palermo or Buenos Aires specifically. He kind of bounces around a lot. The boy's a bouncer, all right? He bounces around a lot. So, Jorge's family had an extensive history of military service. His On his mom's side, they fought in the Argentine Civil War or the War of Independence. I forget which one it is, but they fought in that war, and she used to tell him stories all the time when he was a kid about how brave his ancestors were, and on his father's side as well. But from a young age, Jorge knew he was too bookish and too, you know, I don't want to say intellectual necessarily, but he was too interested in literature and stuff like that to become a soldier, and he was very ashamed of that fact. He said he wanted to be a man of action, but he just couldn't be. That wasn't the type of person that he was. which, I mean, that's tough, dude. This guy's got a tough life story. We got two tough life stories back to back. Last week we had Hamas Abdul Khalis, and this week we got Jorge. I'd say Hamas had it way worse than Jorge, but Jorge still had not. It's not like he was in South Sudan like scratching around trying to find a grain of rice or whatever, but some shit happened to him that definitely mentally fucked him up a little bit, but made him a really good writer, which that's typically how it goes. So Jorge was fluent in both English and Spanish from a young age. His dad spoke English, um, or his mom spoke English. His dad spoke a ton of languages. He has a very like mixed background. He's like Portuguese, I think German, English, like all that shit. And so his family spoke both English and Spanish in the household, so he knew both of these languages, and he would often read Shakespeare from his family's massive English library. And that's what I mean when I say the guy's life is kind of weird, or like his young upbringing at least, because he lives in this extremely poor neighborhood, or not extremely poor, but poorer neighborhood. But his family has this huge English library with over 1,000 volumes of various writers, including Shakespeare. And he's also had like a cleaning lady for his whole life and all that shit. So, which might be the move. Now that I'm thinking about it, it might be the move to just live in like a super shitty ass neighborhood, but have like a huge house and like a bunch of staff and shit like that. That might be the move. And that's kind of how you start your own like feudal like city state. You know what I mean? So it might be the move. So he's living in this poorer neighborhood in Buenos Aires. He's making his family's doing all right, but around 1914, his father's eyesight began to fail, and the family would move to Geneva, Switzerland, where Jorge's father could teach psychology. So I guess growing up, his dad did both lawyer shit and teaching psychology, which I guess makes sense because at least in America, I don't know how the legal system works in Buenos Aires. In America, you got to have an understanding of the way people operate in order to be a good lawyer. You know what I mean? It's not just about knowing the law and shit. That's actually a very small part of it. A very small part of being a lawyer in America is actually knowing the law. The rest is understanding human behavior and human psychology. So I don't know. To me, that makes sense. But that's definitely a tough transition because when you're in a courtroom, you got to think you have like rules and laws and all that shit. And if someone breaks any of them, they get kicked out of the courtroom or they go to jail or whatever. But when you're in a classroom, this is Switzerland in the early 1900s, so the students might be a little bit more well behaved than they are now. But still, I feel like that would be a tough transition. You can't just be like, bailiff, fucking arrest this dude. You know what I mean? There's no gavel or anything. So probably in terms of dealing with people, it was a tough transition. And so they moved to Switzerland so his dad can teach psychology. And while in Switzerland, young Jorge would learn French and German. And it was also here where he began reading the works of Thomas Carlyle, he writes in English, Arthur Schopenhauer, and Gustav Meyrnich's The Golem, which I know what the Golem is in Jewish mythology. It's basically like the Jews in Eastern Europe needed something to protect them, so they basically did like in the Jewish creation story, God makes Adam and Eve out of clay and he breathes life into their nose. It's basically what the Jews did in Eastern Europe, but they made like a golem in order to protect them. Like the Iron Golem in Minecraft, kind of. So, but I don't know if that's what this story's about. I didn't look at it at all. It just sounds weird. You know what I mean? Early 1900s. This is around, it said that the Golem, this story is like a gothic story. So it's kind of like science fiction mixed with like old romantic depictions of Europe and all that stuff. So I don't know, pretty interesting. And these were the works that like really shaped his writing. We'll talk a little bit more because I guess you could construe a lot of his writing as science fiction, but it's a little bit more surrealist than science fiction necessarily. You know what I mean? So, but he read all these works, learned all these languages, and eventually his family moved to Spain, where they would bounce around living in Barcelona, Mallorca, Seville, and Madrid. And Seville, that used to be the capital of Spain for a while. I don't know. I just wanted to throw that fun fact in there. But and I also wanted to say Barcelona. I wanted to say that too. And they lived briefly in another place in Switzerland. It was Geneva, and then they went. It was called like Bourgeois or whatever. I don't fucking know. But they bounced around for a little while. I don't know. I don't know if they were struggling. They clearly have money though. Like that's the thing. If you're bouncing from like apartment to apartment in Cincinnati, that means you don't have money. But if you're going from like Madrid to Barcelona to Geneva and all that stuff, that means you have money. That's like one of the things that rich people and poor people have in common. They're constantly moving, but it's two very different types of movement. You know what I mean? One dude's going from different motels, different like Section 8 housing and fucking I don't know, Detroit or whatever, and these people are like, I think we want to live in Barcelona now, Barcelona, and eat some paella. So, pretty well off family, and so he's bouncing around Spain with his family, and while in Spain, he became involved in he became involved in the anti-modernismo ultraist movement, which that does sound like, and especially if you know about Spain in like kind of the early to mid 20th century, that does sound like a political extremist movement. It wasn't. It was a surrealist, Dada-esque poetry philosophy, I guess is how you could describe it. And if you don't know, Dada it's a style of art that originated in France, and it's basically it just means nonsense. That's from my understanding, that's what Dada means, and so Dada-esque kind of means that the poems are a little bit nonsense, but you read his stories. I didn't read any of his poems, but the stories are pretty cohesive. I would say he more so extrapolated the surrealist aspect of that as opposed to the Dada aspect of it, if I had to necessarily say. Although I get why the Dadaism is put in there. There is a little bit of that. Like it's kind of like surrealism is like the landscape of the story, I guess. Not like the actual physical landscape of it, but the overall like the environment where the story takes place in, and then I guess the Dada element of it would be the actual like plot of the story, if that makes sense. I don't I have no idea. Like I don't think anyone's ever heard of modernismo, which that was also a literature movement in Spain, let alone the anti-modernismo ultralist movement. I don't think anyone's heard of that. And we're going to talk about one other thing that I don't think anyone's ever heard of. So he's living in Spain, becomes involved in this movement, and in 1921, the family returned to Argentina, and Jorge began publishing poems and essays in the ultraist style, as well as the irreality um, style of Argentine literary critic Ana Maria Baren, Barenchia. I think that's how you say her name. And I, I'm just going to say this is probably just like surrealism with a little bit of a twist on it. And the whole literary critic thing is going to come up later when we talk about some of his other works, or maybe just one specifically. But he was very inspired by this woman, and she was also one of the main influences or inspirations in terms of his later works. Like a lot of the things he wrote was almost like, if you've ever heard of Plato's what are they called? Fuck. I forget what they're called, but Plato used to write about philosophy in a way that kind of sounded like a conversation, and this is a lot of the stuff that Jorge would end up writing is kind of analogous to that in a certain way, in the sense that he wouldn't just sit down and write a story. Sometimes he would, but sometimes he would write it through a specific perspective, or he would write like a criticism of a story through a specific perspective. Like I think he did that about Don Quixote. It's like a criticism of Don Quixote, which is like the famous Spanish story about the gentleman. I don't know. I think that's what the ultimate gentleman, Don Quixote. I think that's the name of the story. But this wasn't just like a straight up, he sat down and he was like, this book sucks because of this, this, and that, or whatever. He kind of wrote a story about why it sucks using like parody and satire and all that stuff. And if I had to guess, I would say that came from this lady, Anna Maria Barentia. And so he's putting out these essays and works and all this stuff. And during this time, he worked as a newspaper editor and as a literary advisor for like printing houses and stuff like that before getting a severe head injury on Christmas Eve, 1938, shortly after his father's death. God damn, his dad went blind and then he died on him all in the course of, I guess that was like 24 years there. So he probably had a decent amount of good stuff going on between then. But the way that I'm writing his life story, it just seems like one shitty thing after another. And so his dad died shortly before his 64th birthday. I don't remember what of. I think it was, what it was like heart congestion, I think is what he died of. And almost immediately after that, Jorge gets a severe head injury and on Christmas Eve. And he was a little bit of a drinker in his youth, so maybe if I had to guess, I would say probably that's why the boy had a little bit too much eggnog. Hey, I get it. Not criticizing him or anything, but this head injury would become more than just a head injury. So during treatment for this head injury, he nearly died of sepsis, which I don't even know how that's fucking possible. Maybe he had a cut on his head and that got infected, but still. I'm just imagining like a pretty bad concussion here, and then all of a sudden he gets sepsis. But so he nearly dies of sepsis, and while recovering, he developed the style for which he would be known, which is kind of this, it's surrealist but not nonsensical storytelling, which I guess one of the main characteristics of it that I was able to kind of figure out from reading his Wikipedia page, which is all I did, but from reading his Wikipedia page was the kind of like unique fictionalized perspectives of real people. Like that's, I think that's kind of one of the main things besides the whole surrealism that makes his style of writing so unique. And so Jorge would continue to write and translate the works of other authors, but due to money concerns, he became a public lecturer and he received praise from universities and an appointment from the president. I could have wrote, this guy's a bit of a gump. He's involved in all sorts of crazy situations. Like there was a military junta, or junta, however you say it, basically a military council took over Argentina for a while, and he was involved in that, and the president was in exile, and then the president came back. It's a whole complicated butt fuck, but basically he was a very good public lecturer, and he got like prizes and all this bullshit from universities and stuff like that, and the appointment he got from the president was like the head of the National Argentine Library. So yeah, he's killing it as a lecturer, writing some good stories, but he doesn't really start to get attention from his stories until around the mid-50s. So around the mid-50s, he began receiving international acclaim for his poems and books, and he didn't, during this time, I think he did write books, but he didn't really get into it until the 70s, I believe. So, and two of his most well-known books are Dr. Brody's Report and The Book of Sand, which, like I said, didn't do the deepest of dives into the guy's life, just because I wanted to focus more so on the story that he wrote for this episode. But from what I understand about him, Dr. Brody's Report and The Book of Sand pretty much sums up his writing style. If you want to get a... Sorry, I had to wipe my nose. If you want to get a decent idea of what he was doing. So, he's writing all these stories, getting all this acclaim, and then it hits him again, dude. Like I said, his life wasn't super duper tragic, but but the way I wrote it does make it seem that way, just because I'm going to talk about the big events pretty much exclusively. So Jorge, like his father, began to lose his eyesight and became dependent on his mother, eventually making her his personal secretary, which you got to remember, this is like the 60s or 70s or whatever. And so people were banging their secretaries, and so I think Jorge was banging his mom. And I don't say that just because she was his secretary. I say that also because he slept in the same bed as her. And he did it as a child originally, which, from what I understand, there was no need for that. They had a 1,000 volume English library. There was no need for those two to be sleeping in the same bed. They'd sell fucking Hamlet or whatever and get a bed. So, but as an adult, when he was living in Buenos Aires, he slept in the same bed as his mom, which kind of crazy. I don't know. I felt like that was pretty wild. But he doesn't. I think he might have been autistic as shit because he gets married a couple times, but it's not really like an actual marriage. He's just getting married to be married. Um, he might have been like asexual or whatever, which explains why he wrote all these great stories. And so, sleeping in the bed with his mom, but he did travel around frequently, often accompanied by his personal secretary, Maria uh, Kodama. I think that's how you say her name, whom he would marry a few months before his death. So, this was the second chick that he married. The first chick was like just some random lady that he married. So, he was married twice, but like I said, they were kind of, it was just, I don't know, maybe he was doing it for legal reasons. When he got married to Maria Kodama, they got married in Paraguay so that they didn't have to deal with like the Argentine laws and shit like that. So I think he was just looking out for his personal secretary Maria. And so yeah, gets married to her shortly a few months before his death. And so he's bouncing around, but he really loves Geneva. You got to remember Geneva's the city where he really had his formative years in. To where he, started reading the Golem, all that bullshit. What was the other guy's name? Carlisle. Started reading all that stuff. And so he likes Geneva. He likes living in Geneva. And while in Geneva, Jorge began brooding about the possibility of an afterlife and asked Kodama to bring him priests and ministers to talk to. Which, yeah, I guess that one makes sense. But it's like, if you're thinking about the afterlife just in general, I'd say hedge your bets and just get everyone you can. This is Switzerland. At this point, it's the 80s, I believe, if I remember correctly. So I do think you probably could get like a Buddhist up in there, maybe a Muzzy, if that's what you're interested in. But yeah. So originally, when he was like wanting to talk to priests and all that stuff, he just got like Catholic priests, but then he was like, my mom's like English or whatever, and they're Protestants. So he talked to a few Protestant ministers as well, but he didn't. I don't know. I feel like he could have gotten more done with that. You know what I mean? Like, if you really want to figure out what the hell is going on, I feel like he could have expanded his horizons a little bit. But I understand where he's coming from. And he also has some beliefs that, personal beliefs, not religious beliefs, but personal beliefs that would exclude the religions of maybe people with a little bit more melanin in their skin. And Jorge would die in Geneva in 1986 and be buried beneath a tombstone hewn with symbols from Anglo-Saxon and Old Norse literature. So that's the guy's life story covered in about 20 minutes. We skipped over a whole lot of shit. I tried to get the things that I felt like would be important to the story that we're gonna read, but I don't. No way I could have gotten it. You know what I mean? No way I could have gotten all the things that are gonna be important to the story. Um, but we skipped over some other shit about his life that maybe wouldn't be super important to the story. Like he had a sister named Nora, I believe, who was like, she was also a famous painter in Argentina and stuff like that. And so, yeah, we skipped over a fair amount of things, but I'm going to be reading the story word for word, and I'm very dumb, and I'm probably going to keep forgetting where I'm at throughout the entire story. So I figured it would be best to try to keep the notes short and sweet for this episode. And then, like I said, depending on how much time we have left, I'll jot down some notes about an analysis, a proper intellectual analysis, not my own analysis. I'll jot down one, and then I'll come back and I'll read those if we have time. So let's get it. Let's get this story going on. The Aleph. Aleph. Fuck it, dude. We're already slowing down more than we need to be. So this is the Aleph by Jorge Luis Borges. And I think Maria Kodama's still alive. So Maria, if you're still alive and you're listening to this one, please don't sue me. All right. So this is how we start off the story. I'll leave a link to the story in the description if you guys want to read it outside of this, which I would recommend because I'm not going to do a great job, like I said. So we start off, and there's a couple little quotes here at the beginning. So, oh God, I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself a king of infinite space. Hamlet. I think this is Act 2, Page 2, maybe? Or maybe there's two Hamlets. I think there's only one Hamlet. So this is from Hamlet, and then the other story is, but they will teach us that eternity is the standing still of the present time, a nunc stans, as the schools call it, which neither they nor any else understand, no more than they could hic stands for an infinite greatness of place. And this is from the Leviathan. Leviathan. I think, was that John Locke who wrote that one? But that's not even, see, that's thrown me off a little bit already because Leviathan is like, I think it's a book written by John Locke, but he's like a sociologist or some shit like that. Like I think he was the guy who was interested in like the idea of a social contract or whatever. But it could be from that. I don't know. All right. But fuck it. Let's skip to the actual story. I don't know how this one's gonna go. You know, I've been trying to switch up the way I do episodes. So might go horribly, might go great. No one's really, there's a few people listening and I'm very grateful for those people, but they're nice enough to where I think they'll listen to anything. So I don't think we're gonna have any problems here with that. So on the burning February morning, Beatrice Vitebro died after braving an agony that never for a single moment gave way to self-pity or fear. I noticed that the sidewalks billboards around Constitution Plaza were advertising some new brand or other of American cigarettes. So this lady Beatrice, like I said, I didn't read the story. I do know a little bit about that. That's one to remember. You got to remember that lady. All right, back to the story. So, the fact pained me, for I realized that the wide and ceaseless universe was already slipping away from her, and that this slight change was the first of an endless series. The universe may change, but not me. I thought with a certain sad vanity. I knew that at times my fruitless devotion had annoyed her. Now that she was dead, I could devote myself to her memory, without hope, but also without humiliation. Bit of a simp here. Bit of a simp. Our boy Luis, or our boy Jorge Borges is, because this is the main character in this story is like a fictionalized version of himself, and he's simping out a little bit here. He's already talking about how in real life he annoyed her by being a simp or whatever, and now he's already like, but now that she's dead, I can be a simp again, dude, because I can't annoy her now that she's dead. Just fully simping out, dude. So back to the story. Like I said, I'm going to lose my place in here 1,000 times. So I recalled that the 13th of April was her birthday. On that day, to visit her house on Gary Street and pay my respects to her father and to Carlos Argentino Deneri, her first cousin, would be an irreproachable and perhaps unavoidable act of politeness. Yeah, dude, I'd firmly say so. I'd firmly say that you've got to do that one. You've already admitted to the fact that you've been simping over this lady for a while at least. I think you got to go to the family and be like, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear about her passing." I would say do that. If you didn't do that, I don't know, that sounds a little bit serial killer-ish to me. You know what I mean? Like, there's this chick, you're obsessed with her, you love her, whatever, and then she dies and you don't even say anything. Kind of sounds like you're the one who did it, you know? So he's going up to them. So, once again, I would wait in the twilight of the small, cluttered drawing room. Once again, I would color Beatrice wearing a mask during the carnival of 1921. Beatrice at her first communion. Beatrice on the day of her wedding to Roberto Alessandri. Beatrice soon after her divorce. At a luncheon at the Turf Club. Beatriz at a seaside resort in Quilmes, and with Delia San Marco Porcel and Carlos Argentino. Beatriz with the Pekingese lapdog given her by Villagers Hado. Beatriz, front and three-quarter views, smiling, hand on her chin. I would not be forced as in the past to justify my presence with with modest offerings of books. Books whose pages I finally learned to cut beforehand so as not to find out months later that they lay around unopened. Oh my god, this is fucking tragic, man. This is tragic. This lady, this lady's clearly out of his league. I'll say that from my understanding so far. This lady's clearly out of his league. He's showing up to her house, waiting in the drawing room to fucking give his condolences to her family or whatever, and he's just like, I gave her all these books, but she didn't even read them. Oh, what a bitch! And he's like drawing her and talking about all the dudes she's been with. God damn, dude, this is tough. Jorge, what happened to you, brother? What happened to you? I skipped over this part of his life story, but I guess he was obsessed with a lady at some point in his life. All right, back to the story. So Beatrice Viterbo died in 1929. From that time on, I would never let a 13th of April go without a visit to her house. I used to make my appearance at 7:15 sharp and stay for some 25 minutes. Each year I arrived a little later and stayed a little longer. In 1933, a torrential downpour coming to my aid, they were obliged to ask me for dinner. Naturally, I took advantage of that lucky precedent. In 1934, I arrived just after 8 with one of those large Santa Fe sugar cakes, and quite matter-of-factly, I stayed to dinner. It was in this way, on these melancholy and vainly erotic anniversaries, that I came to the gradual confidences of Carlos Argentino Denari. So, yeah, Carlos. Oh, okay, that's her cousin. Sorry, I forgot. I thought Carlos Argentino Denari was like one of the dudes she was like hanging out with and having lunch with or whatever. But that doesn't make this any less weird. I feel like this is still pretty weird. Be it calling this vainly erotic, and I understand that erotic doesn't necessarily mean sexual, but I feel like in this context it could only it could only be sexual. I can't think of another, because the other definition I know for the term erotic is like the physical, like feeling of something, right? That's maybe not necessarily sexual or even like pleasurable in nature, but just like the feeling of it. But the physical, not like the emotional feeling of it, the physical feeling of it. So, yeah, this guy's out of his goddamn mind, dude. Uh, Talking about just showing up to her family's house every year on the day that she died. I don't know, maybe they grieve differently in Argentina or whatever. I wouldn't want to be hearing about that shit every year. I'd be like, she's dead, dude. We can't we can't focus on it. She's gone. You were always weird, hanging around, drawing pictures of her, giving her books and shit that she didn't even read. I don't know what your fucking problem is, dude. That's probably how I'd react to Jorge, or to, yeah, Jorge Borges in this situation. And remember, our main character here is a self-insert of Jorge. So back to the story. Beatriz had been tall, frail, slightly stooped. In her walk there was, if the oxymoron may be allowed, a kind of uncertain grace, a hint of expectancy. Carlos Argentino was a pink-faced, overweight, gray-haired, fine-featured. Okay. kind of going after both of these people a little bit here, talking about how this lady had like a wooden leg and was walking her with a limp or whatever. Then talking about this dude calling him pink-faced and overweight. I guess those are both pretty objective um descriptions, but then he ends with fine-featured. Is this gonna turn into some weird sexual situation where Jorge's like, I couldn't fuck her, so I'll fuck the next best thing, her overweight, gray-haired male cousin? Is that what this is gonna be? All right, back to the story. So he held a minor position in an unreadable library out on the edge of the south side of Buenos Aires. He was authoritarian but also unimpressive. Until only recently, he took advantage of his nights and holidays to stay at home. At a remove of 2 generations, the Italian S and demonstrative Italian gestures still survived in him. Oh, so we got this big fat guy here that talks like that talks like Tony Soprano, and I kind of already gave a spoiler alert for this story that at some point the universe is going to be like the size of a marble and it's in someone's basement or whatever. It's like the last scene in Men in Black or whatever. I'm interested to see how we're going to get there, but uh, like I talked about, Jorge's a pretty celebrated author, although that doesn't mean that much to me, especially when you talk about more modern or contemporary authors. It's the same with like art and a lot of music and stuff like that, where it's like, oh, they're getting all these accolades and this and that and the other, and it's like that doesn't mean as much to me with contemporary authors. Although I'm not shitting on Jorge, I'm just saying that's my viewpoint at this point. But this is very funny. Italian gestures still survived in him. Oh, how you doing? We're down here in Buenos Aires. They don't got no pizza down here. All right, horrible Italian accent. Back to the story. His mental activity was continuous, deeply felt, far-ranging, and all in all, meaningless. Jorge, you need to pick a side here. You either love this chick and are willing to do anything for her, or you hate her family. I don't know. It just feels. I can understand why she didn't want to get with him. I'll say that much. The guy feels kind of like a dick to me. Just being like, oh yeah, he like was doing all this stuff all day and like reading and all that stuff, but it was meaningless. Not like me. Not like me though. I write and read all day, but it's meaningful. Fuck off, dude. I'm already hating him. I'm already hating Jorge here. So he dealt in pointless analogies and in trivial scruples. He had, as did Beatrice, large, beautiful, finely shaped hands. All right. For several months he seemed to be obsessed with Paul Fort, less with his ballads than with the idea of a towering reputation. He is the prince of poets, Denary would repeat fatuously. He would belittle him in vain, but no, not even the most venomous of your shafts will graze him. Oh wait, you will belittle him in vain, but no, not even the most venomous of your shafts will graze him. So that was basically the last line there. The whole you will belittle him in vain, but no, not even the most venomous of your shafts will graze him. That was Argentino or whatever talking shit to Jorge. Him being like, dude, this Italian dude or whatever, this poet or this guy, Paul Fort, he fucking rules. I don't even read his ballads and he rules so hard, and nothing you can say is gonna get to him. So fuck off. All right. We're back to some weird shit. On the 30th of April, 1941, along with the sugar cake, I allowed myself to add a bottle of Argentine cognac. Carlos Argentino tasted it, pronounced it interesting, and after a few drinks, launched into a glorification of modern man. I view him, he said with a certain unaccountable excitement, in his inner sanctum, as though in his castle tower supplied with telephones, telegraphs, phonographs, wireless sets, motion picture screens, slide projections, glossaries, timetables, handbooks, bulletins. He remarked that for a man so equipped, actual travel was superfluous. Our 20th century had invented the story of Muhammad and the mountain. Nowadays, the mountain came to the modern Muhammad. All right. Basically saying the shit comes to you, you don't need to really go out and get it anymore. I don't. Oh, I feel like I should be like analyzing the story a little bit more. I'm still completely lost. Still completely lost on it. So foolish did his ideas seem to me, so pompous and so drawn out, his exposition, that I linked them at once to literature and asked why he didn't write them down. As might be foreseen, he answered that he had already done so, that these ideas and no others no less striking had found their place in the proem or augural canto, or simply the prologue of canto, of the poem on which he'd been working for many years now, alone, without publicity, without fanfare, with fanfare supported only by those twin staffs universally known as work and solitude. So this guy's got a whole lot of ideas and he's writing them down, or he's talking about them, and no one's listening. Look, I know we're focusing on Jorge this episode, but it kind of seems like this dude, Argentino, he might be literally me. And look, maybe Jorge was like kind of a self-deprecating type of dude, and he wrote this story being like, I'm a fucking loser. So maybe we are supposed to be like, dude, this guy Argentino, I'm not gonna say Argentino rules because I already compared him to myself, but he's a pretty fun guy. I would hang out with the guy, I'd say. All right. So first, he said he opened the floodgates of his fancy. Then, taking up hand tools, he resorted to the file. The poem was entitled The Earth. It consisted of a description of the planet and, of course, lacked no amount of picturesque digressions and bold apostrophes. Bold apostrophes. I asked him to read me a passage, if only a short one. He opened a drawer of his writing table, drew out a thick stack of papers, sheets of a large pad imprinted with the letterhead of the Juan Crisostomo Lafener Library, and with ringing satisfaction declaimed, Mine eyes, as did creeks, have known men's towns and fame, the works, the days in light that fades to amber. I did not change a fact or falsify a name. The voyage I set down is a tour de ma chambre. All right, well, now this guy's kind of a dickhead, too. Argentina is kind of a pompous dickhead, but so is this other guy. You know what I mean? It's just they're at different levels of it. They're different types of they're two ends of the same shitty turd. From my angle, a greatly interesting stanza, he said, giving his verdict. Well, it's nice that he said that about his own poem. The opening line wins the applause of the professor, the academician, and the Hellenist. And to say nothing of the would-be scholar, a considerate sector of the public, the second flows from Homer to Hesiod, generous homage at the very outset to the father of didactic poetry, not without rejuvenating a process whose roots go back to scripture. Enumeration, congeries, conglomeration, the third Baroque, decadent example of the cult of pure form, consists of the two equal hemistichs. The fourth, frankly bilingual, assures me the unstinted backing of all minds sensitive to the pleasures of sheer fun. I should, in all fairness, speak of the novel rhyme in lines 2 and 4, and the edition that allows me, without a hint of pedantry, to cram into 4 lines 3 learned allusions covering 3 centuries packed with literature, from first to the Odyssey, second to Works and Days, and third to the immortal bagatelle bequeathed us by the frolicking pen of the Savillard Xavier de Maistre. Once more, I've come to realize that modern art demands the balm of laughter. The scherzo, decidedly, Goldoni holds the stage. Okay, I kind of regret saying that Argentino rules, because that whole like paragraph that I just read, it was a quote from Argentino, basically like bragging about how good his story is, being like, dude, everybody, or not story, his poem. He's like, dude, everyone fucking loves my poem. It's so good. I covered works from Homer and like all these other writers. He's using all this bullshit fancy language. I don't know if I fuck with the guy. And I kind of do. I gotta kind of agree with Jorge here. He really got it nothing. It was like, no, dude, I got the reference. I saw what you were going for here, uh, but it was retarded. That was a dumb poem. No offense, because Jorge did write that poem. This is a character in Jorge's story, but ultimately Jorge did write that poem, so I don't want to be too mean necessarily, but it was it was pretentious, I'll say. Maybe it wasn't the worst thing I've ever read before, but pretentious certainly, and that explanation didn't help at all. So back to the story. He had many other stanzas, each of which also won his own approval and elicited his lengthy explications. I don't know what explications mean. I'm gonna assume that means explanation. I don't know. But that is funny, dude. Me and Jorge thinking the same things, being like, dude, you're dick writing your own poem, like explaining it to me. If it's that good, I can explain it to myself, dude. Get off my dick. All right. So there was nothing remarkable about them. I did not even find them any worse than the first one. Application, resignation, and chance had gone into writing. I saw, however, that Daenerys' real work lay not in the poetry, but in his invention of reasons why the poetry should be admired. Damn, dude, he's going after him. Of course, this second phase of his effort modified the writing in his eyes through not in the eyes of others. See, me and Jorge are on the same track here. Earlier, when I was like, if the poem's that good, you don't need to explain it to me, I think that's basically what Jorge was saying here. Maybe, maybe not. So Daenerys' style of delivery was extravagant, but the deadly drone of his metric regularity tended to tone down and to dull that extravagance. Among my memories are also some lines of a satire in which he lashed out unsparingly at bad poets, ironic, after accusing them of dressing their poems in the warlike armor of erudition and of flapping in vain their unveiling wings. He concluded with this verse, but they forget, alas, one foremost fact: beauty. I do have to say that that poem was the earlier poem that we read that was by Argentino or whatever. The mine eyes, as did the Greeks, have known men's towns and fame. I'm not going to say it's beautiful, but at least it's attempting to be beautiful. You read some of this shit that's coming out now, and it's nonsense. So I do got to give Argentino a little bit of credit there. Only the fear of creating an army of implacable and powerful enemies dissuaded him, he told me, from fearlessly publishing this poem. it's I don't know. This character Argentina is pretty funny. He's like, dude, if I put this poem out, they're gonna come after me. They're gonna get me for what I'm saying in this poem. He thinks he's the man, dude. Which is, I don't know. That's funny. I fuck with that. Pretty heavy. All right. Only once in my life have I had occasion to look into the 15,000 Alexandries of the Paleo Polyolbion, that topographical epic in which Michael Drayton recorded the flora, fauna, hydrography, orography, military, and monastic history of England. I am sure, however, that this limited but bulky production is less boring than Carlos Argentino's similar vast undertaking. Daenerys had in mind to set to verse the entire face of the planet, and by 1941 had already dispatched a number of acres of the state of Queensland, nearly a mile of the course run by the River Ob, a gasworks to the north of Veracruz, the leading shops of the Buenos Aires parish of Concepcion, the villa of Mariana Cambarica Alviar, de Alvir in the Belgrano section of the Argentine capital, and a Turkish baths establishment not far from the well-known Brighton Aquarium. Yeah, this guy's retarded. He's gonna write a poem about when earlier he was talking about he was trying to write a poem about the entire earth. I thought we were dealing with like the 7 continents or maybe the countries. No, he's talking about every single individual thing on earth. That's so funny. And I think, because like I said, I know the story, the universe comes up at this point. So I think maybe he like finishes the poem and that becomes the universe. I don't know. It might be something like that if I had to predict it. He read me certain long winded passages from his Australian section, and at one point praised a word of his own, coining the color celeste white, which he felt actually suggests the sky, an element of utmost importance in the landscape of the Down Under. But these sprawling, lifeless hexameters lacked even the relative excitement of the so called augural canto. Along about midnight, I left. 2 Sundays later, Daenerys rang me up, perhaps for the first time in his life. He suggested we got together at 4 o'clock for cocktails in the salon bar next door, which the favored-looking Zunino and Zungri, my landlords, as you doubtless recall, are throwing open to the public. It's a place you'll really want to get to know. I'm kind of feeling my boy Jorge here, because it's like this dude. it's this dude who you're like, I want to be nice to this guy. He's like the cousin of this chick that I was in love with or whatever. That's the whole him with the chick is still a little weird and creepy, but whatever. He's trying to be nice to this guy. This guy's like, dude, let's go to a fucking bar. Let's hang out together. And Jorge, you got to come up with an excuse here, brother. I'm sorry. It's not that hard. You just got to come up with one and be like, I can't. No, I can't. I can't do it. Oh, and also, what I wanted to say was when Jorge's talking about the poem that Argentino's writing, and he lists all the things out. It kind of reminded me of um, earlier in the story when Jorge was talking about waiting in the drawing room and drawing all these different perspectives and stuff of Beatriz. It kind of reminded me of that. I don't know if there's going to be anything there, but those two things kind of reminded me of each other, just like this long list, this, as Jorge describes it, this kind of like meaningless obsession with writing a poem about the entire world. I don't know, I could be wrong, but it kind of seems similar to like his obsession with Beatrice or whatever. All right, so he's going to the bar and he says, more in resignation than in pleasure, I accepted. Once there, it was hard to find a table. The salon bar, ruthlessly modern, was only barely less ugly than what I had expected. At the nearby tables, the excited customers spoke breathlessly of the sums Zunino and Zungri had invested in furnishings without a second thought to cost. Carlos Argentino pretended to be astonished by some feature or other of the lighting arrangement with which I felt he was already familiar, and he said to me with a certain severity, grudgingly, you'll have to admit to the fact that these premises hold their own with many others far more in the public eye. This guy's pretentious as shit, dude. I think both of the main characters are pretentious, but Argentino's a bit of a dickhead about it, dude. Like, I feel like pretty soon Argentino's gonna bust open a bottle of wine and be like, "This is from the left bank of Bordeaux. I find it to be rather elementary, but there's something about it that I quite enjoy." Like, that's what I feel like Argentino's about to do, real quick. In writing a poem about the entire world and being like, this poem rules, praising his own poem, really not even letting our boy Jorge get a word in is it's just funny. He then read me 4 or 5 different fragments of the he then reread, sorry. He then reread me 4 or 5 different fragments of the poem. He had revised them following his pet principle of verbal ostentation. Where at first blue had been good enough, he now wallowed in azures, ceruleans, and ultramarines. The word milky was too easy for him. In the course of an impassioned description of the shed where wool was washed, he chose such words as lacteal, lactescent, and even made one up, lactentaceous. Or wait, yeah, lactinaceous. Lactinaceous sounds like a black name. There's a guy in the NBA definitely named Lactinaceous. But yeah, once again, Argentina has proven he's a dickhead here. After that, straight out, he condemned our modern mania for having books prefaced with, quote, a practice already held up to scorn by the Prince of Wits in his own grateful preface to the Quixote. He admitted, however, that for the opening of his new work, an attention getting forward might prove valuable, an accolade signed by a literary hand of renown. He next went on to say that he considered publishing the initial cantos of his poem. I then began to understand the expected telephone call. De Niro was going to ask me to contribute a foreword, that's what I thought, to his pedantic hodgepodge. My fear turned out unfounded. Carlos Argentino remarked with admiration and envy that surely he could not be far wrong in qualifying with the epithet solid, the prestige enjoyed in every circle by Alvaro Melian Laffiner. Okay. That guy was mentioned earlier, I'm pretty sure. A man of letters who would, if I insisted on, be only too glad to dash off some charming opening, words to the poem. Damn, dude. This guy Argentino, is a bit of a dickhead at this point. Like, I feel like you gotta have, even if you are like, I'm gonna write a poem about the entire world, trying to pressure this dude who is in love with your dead cousin into getting another dude to write a foreword to your shitty poem is, I feel like you have to acknowledge the just like the weirdness of that. I don't know. And that's basically what that whole little section was saying. That he was like, oh fuck, Argentina's gonna ask me to like write a bunch of letters to this guy to try to get him to write a foreword for this story. And he's probably not even gonna read the story, but if he does, he's gonna realize how shitty it is, and he's probably gonna be pissed off at me. All right. So in order to avoid ignominy, whatever the fuck that means, and failure, he suggested I make myself spokesman for two of the book's undeniable virtues: formal perfection and scientific rigor. Quote, inasmuch this wide garden of metaphors, of figures of speech, of elegances, is inhospitable to the last detail, not strictly upholding of truth. He added that Beatriz had always been taken with Alvaro, sorry. Dude, he is, our boy Jorge is suffering. First of all, this chick died, he was in love with her or whatever. I feel like he's got to get over that one a little bit. But then he's kind of getting cucked here a little bit with fucking Argentino being like, she was always in love with Alvaro. And please ask Alvaro to write a fucking, write a letter about my book. Dude, this is tough. All right, back to the story. I agreed profusely, and explained for the sake of credibility that I could not speak to Alvaro the next day, Monday, but would wait until Thursday when we got together for the informal dinner that follows every meeting of the Writers Club. No such dinners are ever held, but is an established fact that the meetings do take place on Thursdays, a point which Carlos Argentino Deneri could verify in the daily papers, and which lent a certain reality to my promise, half in prophecy, half in cunning. I said that before taking up the question of a preface, I would outline the unusual plan of the work. We then said goodbye. So he hit him with the classic, yeah, I'll talk to him about it, and then being like, I ain't gonna say a word about this fool's dumbass poem. Turning the corner of Bernardo de Irigoyen, I reviewed as impartially as possible the alternatives before me. They were A, to speak to Alvaro, telling him the first cousin of Beatriz, the explanatory euphemism, would allow me to mention her name, but concocted had concocted a poem that seemed to draw out into infinity the possibilities of cacophony and chaos. B, not to say a word to Alvaro, I clearly foresaw that my indolence would opt for B. So he's kind of, he's like, I'm not going to ask Alvaro to write this letter for a couple reasons. A, this book sucks. Also, I don't want to talk about Beatriz. And then he's like, so I'm just not going to say anything. Classic beast. I'm starting to fuck with this guy a little bit more. But first thing Friday morning, I began worrying about the telephone. It offended me, that device, which had once produced me irrecoverable voice of Beatrice, could now sink as low to become a mere receptacle for the futile and perhaps angry remonstrates of that deluded Carlos Argentino Deneri. Luckily, nothing happened, except the inevitable spite touched off in me by this man who had asked me to fulfill a delicate mission for him and then had let me drop. All right, I'm going to take a break there real quick. All right, let's get it. Gradually, the phone came to lose its terrors, but one day toward the end of October it rang, and Carlos Argentino was on the line. He was deeply disturbed, so much so that at the outset I did not recognize his voice. Sadly but angrily, he stammered that the now unrestrainable Zuzino and Zungri, the dudes who own that bar, under the pretext of enlarging their already outsized salon bar, were about to take over the rear or were about to take over and tear down his house. My home, my ancestral home, my old and intervening Garay Strait home, he kept repeating, seeming to forget his woe in the music of his words. It was not hard for me to share his distress. After the age of 50, all change becomes a hateful symbol of the passing of time. Besides, the scheme concerned a house that for me would always stand for Beatriz. I tried explaining this delicate scruple of regret, but Daenerys seemed not to hear me. This guy's such a dick. He said that if Zunino and Zungri persisted in this outrage, Dr. Zuni, his lawyer, would sue ipso facto and make them pay some $50,000 in damages. God. Getting his house torn down. I'm wondering, like I said before, I know this story involves like the universe or whatever. I'm just wondering where that's going to start to come up. So Zuni's name impressed me. His firm, although at the unlikely address of Caseros and Takuri, was nonetheless known as an old and reliable one. I asked him whether Zuni had already been hired for the case. Daenerys said he would phone him that very afternoon. He hesitated. Then, with that level, impersonal voice we reserve for confiding and sometimes intimate, he said that to finish the poem, he could not get along without the house because down in the cellar there was an Aleph. Okay, dude, this is where it comes up. I knew it was going to come up at some point. He explained that an Aleph is one of the points in space that contains all other points. I wonder, and also another thing that I've kind of been noticing so far is that from like the very beginning of the story, obviously Jorge's obsessed with Beatriz, but I guess he's 50 years old. I thought he was like in his early 20s. No, he's 50 years old, and he's just still talking about her. And like this dude's house is about to get torn down, and I get it. The guy's kind of a dick or whatever, but the dude's house is about to get torn down for a bar, and he's like, "Oh, but Beatriz, that's where Beatrice's cousin lives." And I understand that like the whole reason he's still fucking with this guy is because of Beatriz or whatever, but like, goddamn man, get over it. You're a man. You're 50. You know, it's like that Mike Gundy quote. I'm a man. I'm 40. Come after me. That's kind of how I'm feeling about about fucking Jorge a little bit in this story. And also, if a dude was like, I got the entire like universe in my basement right now, dude, so I can't. You gotta help me out with this one. I'd be like, man, like I feel like having that in and of itself is just like tell someone else that you have it and be like, I'll pay if you give me $1,000, I'll let you look at it, and then you won't need my help. I don't know. That's kind of how I feel about this a little bit, but I understand this is surrealism, maybe a little magical realism, and maybe these Aleph things are common because he seems pretty okay with it. But back to the story. So, quote, it's in the cellar under the dining room, he went on, so overcome by his worries now that he forgot to be pompous, still going after him. It's mine. I discovered it when I was a child, all by myself. The cellar stairway is so deep that my aunt and uncle forbade me from using it, but I'd heard someone say there was a world down there. I found out later they meant an old-fashioned globe of the world, but at the time I thought they were referring to the world itself. One day, when no one was home, I started down in secret, but I stumbled and fell. When I opened my eyes, I saw the Aleph. The Aleph? I repeated. And so he talks about Argentino here is kind of talking about when he fell down the stairs, he opened his eyes and he saw the Aleph. That kind of reminds me a little bit of, remember in Jorge's life, when he gets that severe injury, the severe head injury, and then he's recovering from it, and he develops like this new style of writing that he's super well known for. It kind of reminds me of that a little bit, although I'm not sure. All right, so back to Argentino. Yes, the only place on earth where all places are, seen from every angle, each standing clear without any confusion or blending. I kept the discovery to myself and went back every chance I got. As a child, I did not foresee that this privilege was granted to me so that later I could write the poem. Zunino and Zungri will not strip me of what's mine. No, and 1,000 times no. Legal code in hand, Dr. Zuni will provide that my Aleph is inalienable. Inalienable. Yeah, dude. If this is trying to like take a rational approach to this story is funny, or like a realistic approach, but it's so funny to be like, if another guy finds out I have the entire universe in my basement, then he's gonna let me keep my house, right? It's like, no, he's probably gonna tell the government or some shit, and then they're gonna take this fucking house from me. Dude, the fuck are you talking about? Okay, but I said try to take a realistic angle to this story is crazy, but that's also what Jorge's trying to do here. So he says, I tried to reason with him, but isn't the cellar very dark? I said, truth cannot penetrate a closed mind. If all places in the universe are in the Aleph, then all stars, all lamps of source, all sources of light are in it too. You wait there, I'll be right over to see it. I kind of agree with him here. You know, this is a situation where I'd kind of be like, either way, I want to see what's going on here. Either this dude's out of his goddamn mind, or he has the universe in his basement. Either way, I just kind of want to see what's going on. This is interesting, regardless of the truth of the situation, I'll say. I hung before he could say no. The full knowledge of a fact sometimes enables you to see all at once many supporting but previously unsuspected things. It amazed me not to have suspected until that moment that Carlos Argentino was a madman. I wasn't thinking he was crazy either. I thought he was just an asshole, as were all the Viterbos. And when you came down to it, Beatriz, I myself often say, was a woman, a child with almost uncanny powers of clairvoyance but forgetfulness, distractions, contempt, and a streak of cruelty were also in her, and perhaps these called for a pathological explanation. Carlos Argentino's madness filled me with spiteful elation. Deep down, we had always detested each other. And he's still talking about Beatriz, and I get it. He's trying to be like, the whole family's insane, so of course this guy's gonna be insane too, but he's still talking about her. And I wonder if he's a little bit like, if this is gonna help him get over her a little bit, just being like, these motherfuckers are crazy. I don't give a shit about him at all. I don't care that she died or whatever. I wonder. All right. On Garay Street, the maid asked me kindly to wait. The master was, as usual, in the cellar developing pictures. On the unplayed piano beside a large vase that held no flowers smiled, more timeless than belonging to the past, the large photograph of Beatrice in gaudy colors. Nobody could see us. In a seizure of tenderness, I drew close to the portrait and said to it, Beatrice, Beatrice Elena, Viterbo, darling Beatrice, now gone forever, it's me, it's Borges. What a psycho. You know, he wants to sit here and call Argentino crazy, and he's like talking to a painting being like, I miss you, it's me. Yeah, what a fucking psycho. Moments later, Carlos came in. He spoke dryly. I could see he was thinking of nothing else but the loss of the Aleph. First, a glass of pseudo-cognac, he ordered, and then down you dive into the cellar. Let me warn you, you'll have to lie flat on your back, total darkness, total immobility, and a certain ocular adjustment will also be necessary. From the floor, you must also focus your eyes on the 19th step. Once I leave you, I'll lower the trap door and you'll be quite alone. You needn't fear the rodents very much, though I know you will. In a minute or two, you'll see the Aleph, the microcosm of the alchemists and Kabbalists, our true proverbial friend, the multum in parvo. I don't know, I think that's probably Latin or something like that. Once we were in the dining room, he added, of course, if you don't see it, your incapacity will not invalidate what I have experienced. Now, down you go. In a short while, you could babble with all of Beatrice's images. You heard him talking to the painting, dude. That's hilarious. I'm back with Argentino. Argentino's kind of a beast, being like, if you don't see the universe down there, that's not my fucking fault, dude. It's real. Also, why the fuck you talking to a fucking painting of my cousin, you crazy dickhead? Alright. Tired of his inane words, I quickly made my way. The cellar, barely wider than the stairway itself, was something of a pit. My eyes searched the dark, looking in vain for the globe Carlos Argentino had spoken of. Some cases of empty bottles and some canvas stacks cluttered one corner. Carlos picked up a sack, folded it in two, and at a fixed spot spread it out. As a pillow, he said. This is quite threadbare, but it's padded even a half-inch higher. You won't see a thing, and oh, but if it's padded even a half-inch higher, you won't see a thing, and there you'll lie, feeling ashamed and ridiculous. All right, now sprawl that hulk of yours there on the floor and count off 19 steps. I went through with his absurd requirements, and at last he went away. The trap door was carefully shut. The blackness, in spite of a chink that I later made out, seemed to me absolute. For the first time I realized the danger I was in. I let myself be locked in a cellar by a lunatic after gulping down a glassful of poison. I knew the back of Carlos's transparent boasting lay a deep fear that I might not see the promised wonder. To keep his madness undetected, to keep from admitting he was mad, Carlos had to kill me. I felt a shock of panic, which I tried to pin to my uncomfortable position, and not the effect of a drug. I shut my eyes, I opened them, then I saw the Aleph. Alright, seeing it, dude, he's seeing the universe. I arrived now at the ineffable core of my story, and here begins my despair as a writer. All language is a set of symbols whose use among its speakers assumes a shared past. How then can I translate into words the limitless Aleph, which my floundering mind can scarcely encompass? So I think what he's saying there is like, no one's ever even seen this thing before, and like, in order for words to have meaning, they have to be connected to something, and so I can't really connect words to this thing because no one's ever seen it before. And even then, if I could, I'm going fucking crazy over here. I think that's what he's saying. Alright. Mystics, faced with the same problem, fall back on symbols to signify the Godhead. One Persian speaks of a bird that somehow is all birds. Alenus de Insulis, of a sphere whose center is everywhere and the circumference is nowhere. Ezekiel, of a four-faced angel who at one time and the same time moves east and west and north and south. Not in vain do I recall these inconceivable analogies. They bear some relation to the Aleph. Perhaps the gods might grant me a similar metaphor, but then this account would become contaminated by literature, by fiction. Really, what I want to do is impossible, for any listing of an endless series is doomed to be infinitesimal. You guys know the fucking word I'm trying to say. In that single gigantic instant, I saw millions of acts, both delightful and awful. Not one of them accompanied the same point in space, without overlapping or transparency. What my eyes beheld was simultaneous, but what I shall now write down will be successive, because language is successive. Nonetheless, I'll try to recollect what I can. Alright. Let's take a deep breath, because this is a lot of fucking reading that I'm about to do about all the fucking bullshit that he saw. And he saw a lot of bullshit, and I'm sure somewhere in all this bullshit, he's gonna somehow bring up Beatriz, because the motherfucker could not stop talking about Beatriz. Alright, let me take a sip of water real quick, and then I'll get into it. No one's listening at this point, so it doesn't matter. Alright. On the back part of the step, toward the right, I saw a small iridescent sphere of almost unbearable brilliance. At first, I thought it was revolving. Then I realized that this moment was an illusion created by the dizzying world it bounded. The Aleph's diameter was probably a little more than an inch, but all space was there, actual and undiminished. Each thing, a mirror's face, let us say, was infinite things. Since I distinctly saw it from every angle of the universe, I saw the teeming sea. I saw daybreak and nightfall. I saw the multitudes of America. I saw a silvery cobweb in the center of a black pyramid. I saw a splintered labyrinth. It was London. I saw close up the unending eyes watching themselves in me as in as in a mirror. I saw all the mirrors of the earth and none of them reflected me. I saw in a backyard of Solar Street the same tiles that 30 years before I'd seen in the entrance of a house in Fray Bentos. I saw bunches of grapes, snow, tobacco, loads of metal, steam. I saw convex equatorial deserts in each one of their grains of sand. I saw a woman in Inverness, whom I shall never forget. I saw her tangled hair, her tall figure. I saw the cancer in her breast. I saw a ring of baked mud in a sidewalk where before there had been a tree. I saw a summer house in Ojorgid, however the fuck you say that, and a copy of the first English translation of Pliny. Shout out Pliny the Elder. Philemon Holland's. Okay, so I guess it's Philemon Holland's translation of Pliny the Elder. I guess because you gotta remember Jorge's a translator, so he's giving a shout out to his fellow translator. Alright, sorry. And all at the same time saw each letter on each page. As a boy, I used to marvel that the letters in a closed book did not get scrambled and lost overnight. I saw a sunset in Quertero that seemed to reflect the color of a rose in Bengal. I saw an empty bedroom. I saw a closet in Alkmaar, a terrestrial globe between two mirrors that multiplied it endlessly. I saw horses with flowing manes on a shore of the Caspian sea at dawn. I saw the delicate bone structure of a hand. I saw the survivors of a battle sending out picture postcards. I saw in a showcase in Mirzapur Park, a pack of Spanish playing cards. I saw the slanting shadows of ferns on a greenhouse floor. I saw tigers, pistons, bisons, tides, and armies. I saw all of the ants on the planet. I saw a Persian astrolabe. I saw it in the drawer of a writing table, and the handwriting made me tremble. Unbelievable, obscure, detailed letters which Beatriz had written to Carlos Argentino. I saw a monument I worshipped in the Ketchkartia Cemetery. I'm guessing that's where Beatriz is fucking buried, goddamn. I saw the rotted dust and bones that had once deliciously been Beatrice Viterbo. I saw the circulation of my own dark blood. I saw the coupling of love and the modification of death. I saw the Aleph from every single point and angle. And in the Aleph, I saw the earth, and in the earth, the Aleph, and in the Aleph, the earth. I saw my own face and my own bowels. I saw your face, and I felt dizzy and wept, for my eyes had seen that secret and conjectured object, whose name is common to all men, but which no man has looked upon, the unimaginable universe. The story doesn't end there, though. And like I said, I fucking knew this dickhead was going to bring up Beatrice. I wonder what was in the letters. Because he says he saw some letters in, like, Beatrice's drawer or whatever that she sent to Carlos Argentino. So I wonder what's in those letters, dude. But he says it, like, made him feel sick or whatever. So maybe she was talking shit about him. I hope she was at this point. This guy's getting a little bit annoying. I felt infinite wonder, infinite pity. Feeling pretty cockeyed, are you? After so much spying into places where you have no business, said a hated and jovial voice. Even if you were to rack your brains, you couldn't pay me back in 100 years for this revelation. One hell of an observatory, eh, Borges? Carlos is so chill. Like, Borges looks into the Aleph or whatever, and he's like, I'm losing my mind, and he's like, he's weeping and thinking of Beatrice or whatever, and this guy's like, dude, you saw all this shit at the same time? That was pretty sick, dude, right? You want to write a poem about it now? You want to write this poem with me, dude? I'm telling you. Carlos Argentino's feet were planted on the topmost step. In the sudden dim light, I managed to pick myself up and utter, one hell of a... Yes, one hell of a... The matter-of-factness in my voice surprised me. Anxiously, Carlos Argentino went on. Did you see everything really clearly in colors? At that moment, I found my revenge, kindly, openly pitying him, distraught, erasive. I thanked Carlos Argentino Denari for the hospitality of his cellar and urged him to make the most of the demolition to get away from the pernicious metropolis which spares no one. Believe me, I told him, no one. Quietly and forcefully, I refused to discuss the Aleph. On saying goodbye, I embraced him and repeated that the country, that fresh air and quiet were the great physicians. Wait, maybe I'm misinterpreting this here, but it kind of seems like he was like, that he was like fucking with Carlos here by being like, I didn't see anything, dude. You actually went crazy. But once again, he's kind of being a dickhead because it's like, I get it. You don't like Carlos or whatever, but just come out and be like, dude, I don't know. I don't like poetry or whatever, and kind of stop talking to him. Don't make the guy think he went insane and, let him get his house destroyed. And all for what? For Beatriz? You know she's dead, dude. I don't know what this guy's on about. All right. So, out on the street, going down the stairways inside Constitution Square, riding the subway, every one of the faces seemed familiar to me. I was afraid that not a single thing on earth would ever again surprise me. I was afraid I would never again be free of all I had seen. Happily, after a few sleepless nights, I was visited once more by oblivion. All right, postscript. So this is kind of the epilogue, I think it's called. Yeah, because the prelogue is the beginning, and then this is the epilogue, and it's about 1.5 pages. So, postscript of March 1st, 1943. Some 6 months after the pulling down of a certain building on Garay Street, Procrusts and Company, the publishers, not put off by the considerable length of Denari's poem, brought out a selection of its Argentine sections. It is redundant now to repeat what happened. Carlos Argentino Denari won the second National Prize for Literature. I received your paying congratulations, he wrote me. You rage, my poor friend, with envy, but you must confess, even if it chokes you, that this time I have crowned my cap with the reddest of feathers, my turban with the most caliph of rubies. Get them, dude. Get them. I'm back on Carlos's side fully. That guy's the man. First prize went to Dr. Eta. Third prize to Dr. Mario Bonfanti. Unbelievably, my own book, The Sharper's Cards, did not get a single vote. This guy's more like Carlos than he thinks. Because remember earlier when Carlos is like praising his own story or whatever, and Jorge's kind of like, dude, you're being a dickhead. And now he's the one being like, my story didn't get a single vote, and Carlos got second place. He's just not as alpha as Carlos, and he just won't say it out loud. All right. Once again, Dulgers and envy had their triumph. It's been some time now that I've been trying to see Denari. The gossip is that a second selection of the poem was about to be published. His flirtatious pen, no longer cluttered by the Aleph, has now set itself to the task of writing an epic on our national hero, General San Martin. I want to add 2 final observations. One, on the nature of the Aleph, the other on its name. As is well known, the Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, as is well known. Its use for the strange sphere in my story may not be accidental. For the Kabbalah, the letter stands for the Ein Sof, the pure and boundless Godhead. It is also said that it takes the shape of a man pointing to both heaven and earth in order to show the lower world is the map and mirror of the higher. For Cantor's Mengalerhi, it is the symbol of transinfinite numbers, of which any part is great as the whole, is as great as the whole. All right. I would like to know whether Carlos Argentino chose that name or whether he read it, applied it to another point where all points converge. In one of the numberless texts that Aleph in his cellar revealed to him, incredible it may seem, I believe that the Aleph of Garay Street was a false Aleph. Okay. And he's about to explain to us why. Hold on, let me wipe my nose real quick, and then we can see why he thinks it's a false Aleph. I, what else could it possibly be, dude? What else? I think it's gonna have to do with Beatriz in the letters, if I had to guess. If I had to guess. So here are my reasons. Around 1867, Captain Burton held the post of British consul in Brazil. In July 1942, Pedro Henriquez Urania came across a manuscript of Burton's in a library at Santos dealing with the mirror, which the Oriental world attributes to Iskander Zu al-Zarnian, or Alexander Bicornus of Macedonia. Is that Alexander the Great? In its crystal, the whole world was reflected. Burton mentions other similar devices: the sevenfold cup of Kai Corso, the mirror that Tariq ibn Ziyad found in the tower 1001 Nights 272, the mirror that Lucian Samosata examined on the moon, True History 126, the mirror-like spear that was the first book of Capella's Satyricon, attributes Merlin's universal mirror, which was round and hollow and seemed a world of glass, the Fairy Queen, 3-19, whatever the fuck that means, and adds this curious statement. But the aforesaid objects, besides the disadvantage of not existing, are mere optical illusions. The faithful who gather at the Mosque of Amir in Cairo are acquainted with the fact that the entire universe lies inside of the stone pillars that ring its central court. Not one of the not no one of no one of course could actually see it, but those who lay an ear against the surface tell after some short while they perceive its busy hum. The mosque dates from the 7th century. The pillars come from other temples of pre-Islamic religions, since, as Ibn Khaldun has written, in other nations founded by nomads, the aid of foreigners is essential in all concerning masonry. Does this Aleph exist in a heart of stone? Did I see it there in the cellar when I saw all things, and now I have forgotten it? Our minds are porous in forgetfulness and sleep. I myself am distorting and losing under the wearing away of the years the face of Beatriz. Alright, here's my analysis of the story. This guy's retarded. No, I don't know what they're getting at here. I think it has something to do with Beatriz. If I had to say overall and take a shot in the dark, him kind of denying the Aleph kind of to me seems like him denying that Beatriz didn't really give a shit about him. I don't know, he doesn't, even when he sees the truth, he still denies it. And also, Carlos lost his house. What the fuck, man? What the fuck? All right. Yeah. No one's listening to this at this point, but I hope you guys all have a good day, a good year, a good life, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.